What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, an emergency edition of the Mets Pod. Pete Alonso to the Orioles on a 5-year, $155 million deal. Joe and I are going to break it all down. But before we do, performance, range, style, 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles. Escalade, IQ, Vistic, Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, through the good times and the bad times. And this episode, I think, Joe, there's no other way around it. It is one of the bad times. We're going to talk about Pete Alonso going to the Orioles, kind of what's next, maybe a little legacy talk of Pete as well, though we'll have a lot of time for that too. Joe, this one's different, I think, because any Met fan kind of felt this coming a little bit. But the fact it was in such a tight window of one we didn't think was happening and Edwin Diaz leaving makes it so much worse. Some Met fans were bracing for this last year, and with how little of a market Pete had, he ended up back with the Mets on a deal that was very favorable to the Mets and gave him his opt-out. And here we are in a span of not even 2 full days. Edwin Diaz is gone in a very convoluted situation that a lot of people can't make sense of. And right after, if you were expecting David Stearns and Steve Cohen and the Mets to have urgency to retain a homegrown guy like Pete Alonso after losing a beloved Met like Edwin Diaz, you sadly were probably even more disappointed. So where's your head at with this one, Joe?
I got a little unhinged this morning, Connor, and that's not really my way of being.
Not at all.
I think it is just the fact, and as you said it's the fact that it was in 24 hours, Edwin Diaz departs, and then 24 hours later, Pete Alonso departs. At its core, the Mets and Pete Alonso have been on track for a divorce for a calendar year.
Yep.
If we just think back to last offseason, I'm not saying the Mets didn't want Pete Alonso, but the Mets wanted Pete Alonso exclusively at the value that they valued him at. And it took until February and Alonso not developing any kind of market where he just essentially went back and took whatever the Mets would give him because it was the best and maybe only thing that he could get his hands on. This winter, all the reporting has been the Mets do not want to go further than 3 years on Pete Alonso. That was the case last year. That's the case now. And Alonso deserved and earned a bigger contract than that. And David Stearns, I'm going to say this. He's going to get a lot of flack. He's someone that I think Mets fans are particularly unhappy with right now.
As they should be in this moment.
Yeah, 100%. But what I will say is this is a guy that is confident in whatever his plan is, and we'll maybe put a couple stabs at that later in the show. He believes in what he's doing, and if there's any doubt that this is David Stearns' show, I think that doubt is completely removed because there's no emotional Steve Cohen, like you said, reaction. Like Edwin Diaz leaves. Forget it, Stearns. I own this team. I have all the money. Give Pete Alonso whatever is necessary to keep him. This is David Stearns' show, and we're going to see kind of where he goes with it. But a incredibly tough day, and I don't want to mince words. I don't want to make it downplay it at all. This has been a brutal, brutal last 2 days to be a Mets fan.
It is. I think these are very different scenarios too, right? Diaz, it feels like both sides are very confused, and that's a bad look for the organization, in my opinion, is they clearly wanted Edwin Diaz, and they played games, they messed around, and they didn't get him, and they failed at the negotiation, quite frankly. With Pete, you don't have to like this, but I actually don't agree with you, Joe. I don't think the Mets wanted Pete Alonso back. I don't. And I think we see it the same way. Their terms, not going beyond 3 years. I think David Stearns is a smart enough guy to know what's going on around the league and how guys are valued. And because we even heard they didn't make a real offer once they heard this was swimming in the 4 and 5 year territory. Then he didn't want him. Sorry, but you can only be so risk averse, right? Which is bizarre under this ownership group where you have a get out of jail card with almost every deal you do because there's so much money. I understand being smart compared to being reckless, but then there's also the strategy of being so afraid to make a mistake that you actually within that are making the mistake. Because with Pete Alonso, man, like I've been a critic of Pete Alonso plenty of times. I'm not going to sit here and act high and mighty and above that, but I'm also smart enough, and it doesn't take a genius and a big enough Met fan watching almost every game to tell you that am I confident they're going to replace his offensive production? Just because I didn't love Pete Alonso playing first base doesn't mean I don't want Pete Alonso in the Mets lineup. And you can do one without the other. Pete Alonso could be a New York Met and not be the first baseman for the next 5 years. It's not like they have a clog at the DH spot right now. So they didn't value Pete the way the Orioles did. And I get the people that are like, the back end of that contract might not be pretty. You're probably right. But with Juan Soto here, with Francisco Lindor in his prime, and I wasn't even somebody that I understood they need to shake up the core. Trading Brandon Nimmo is the start of that. There's other things. I still think they could trade Jeff McNeil or Kodai Senga. There's moves you can make. I think the tough one for me right now, Joe, and I think you feel the same, is with the lack of supply out there in the market, I don't know what the plan is for this one. Kyle Schwarber's off the market. I don't see some big surplus of first basemen out there or power bats out there. People don't really like letting power get to free agency, and they don't like trading power. It's a commodity in the league. This was about money. And it's not like this was a scenario where some other teams might have felt how the Mets went with Soto last year, where it's like, we couldn't go to the stratosphere that the Mets went. Yeah, it's 5 years, $155 million. It's a really good deal for Pete. It's even a little bit too rich for most people in baseball's blood. But let's not sit here and act like this is insane right now, especially when Cody Bellinger or whoever it may be is going to blow the steel out of the water, in my opinion. So I don't know, Joe. It's the most disappointed I've been as a Met fan, not because I expected this day to happen with Pete, but when it's right off the heels of how they lost Edwin Diaz, and it feels like I'm sure they have a plan, but it's hard to just be so optimistic about whatever it is right now. It's hard to like how this offseason has played out for the Mets. And for the first time, I have sat here today and said, is this job too big for David Stearns? I believe he's a smart guy. I'm not second guessing any of that. But the job of being the president of baseball operations for one of the biggest market teams in the sport is more than just trying to win every negotiation, trying to assess in a spreadsheet an exact value on a player, and trying to get the number of wins down to an exact science in those spreadsheets. There is the feel of the fan base matters here. And it's not everything. You're going to have to make moves that are unpopular at times, or else you're going to end up sitting in the stands with the fans. But you're also going to have a feel for this fan base. And right now, I'll be honest with you, and this can change and it can improve. I don't think David Stearns has any feel for this fan base in the moment. And I think that's most disappointing because we all know he grew up a New York Mets fan.
Connor, I mean, that's a pretty good tangent from you. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And when I think about this here with David Stearns and is this job too big for him? Look, he's a brilliant person.
Without a doubt.
Brilliant individual. When you get this job in this moment that this job exists, there needs to be a semblance of irrationality in the way you operate. We don't want to operate in recklessness. Like we didn't need the Mets to go 6 years on Pete Alonso. And, we talked a little bit on the live show. We didn't need him to go crazy like that, but you can't just cut the cord at 3 years on everything. And if that's what you're going to do, you're not going to land many impactful players. You will get some. There'll be some markets that, fall into your range. Maybe a Michael King falls into that range. Maybe Framber Valdez's market doesn't go as expected and he falls into that range. But here, this is a situation where could the Mets have gone 5 years on Pete Alonso? Easy. Should they have? I think that's up for debate. And
it's absolutely a debate.
Yeah,
yep.
I don't feel, and this is maybe not the best for podcast and content, I don't feel incredibly strong either way. Like if this show was flipped and this was an emergency episode and the Mets gave Pete Alonso 5 years and $155 million, I don't think I'd be screaming that it's some horrible deal that's going to bog the Mets down, because it simply isn't going to. With the money that this team has, they should be able to make these investments. And after 2025 went the way it did, I said this on the live show, 2026 has to be better. And right now, where we stand, and it can change. And if it does, me and you will do a show on January 12th or whatever that says, you know what, David Stearns, you were right. This Mets team, I can see how it can be better than last year's team. But where we stand today, it's just an add-on from yesterday. They went from Brandon Nimmo to Marcus Semien, downgrade. They went from Edwin Diaz to Devin Williams, downgrade. They don't have Pete Alonso, and there is not a replacement for the power that Pete Alonso provides other than Eugenio Suarez on the market. And he is not the hitter that Pete Alonso is.
No.
He is a all home run, that's it kind of guy. You'll get around 40 homers from him probably, but he's not going to hit for average. He's not going to get on base. He's going to strike out a ton. So replacing that power bat, it just doesn't seem feasible right now.
It's hard to, once again, we could be surprised by a trade, and Joe and I are the first people to jump on this podcast and give credit where it's due and admit where we might have been wrong or overlooked things. And we're also usually the first people after every move, good or bad, to be like, let's see the full picture, because the baseball offseason is very weird because it is so long and dragged out that anything can happen at any moment. But what we can log on tonight and say is the Mets are drastically behind right now because they were one of the biggest disappointments in sports last year. And when you're one of the biggest disappointments in sports, you need to regain the confidence of a fan base that invests a lot of money into this team, man. Like, let's call it what it is right now. It is expensive to go to games. It's expensive to do anything with sports right now, but people invest their time and money into sports, and I know dang well they do with the Mets. And what they invested time and money into last year, they were left wildly disappointed. And when that happens, you almost need an early move to kind of get the vibes changed a little bit, to change the direction or just get the taste out of your mouth. And the Mets have done the opposite. They've let this spiral. I'm sorry, but trading Nimmo, that's a lot. And you could listen to our podcast about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of baseball reasons and big picture reasons. The Edwin Diaz situation, to me, looks like the Mets were not prepared, and that's unacceptable. The Pete Alonso situation feels more stubborn than a lack of preparation, where you better have some offensive additions, because that team last year wasn't good enough with Pete Alonso, and he wasn't the problem. Edwin Diaz wasn't the problem. Edwin Diaz was marvelous last year. So a lot of people keep asking me, Joe, or I hear it come up in conversation, like, won't you just feel better when they sign Bellinger or whoever it may be? And the Mets are not a Bellinger away from fixing their woes last year. They're not a Michael King away. And it goes back to our combo of like, how will it all look at the end? But if you operate the way you're operating, which is exactly what you just said, Joe, you're not signing Cody Bellinger or Kyle Tucker or trading for Tarek Skubal, or you're not in any of those conversations. You're waiting out the Robert Suarez market. Are we serious right now? What are we in the 2012 New York Mets era? I mean, let's be, sometimes you got to like scale back yourself and go be a big dog. And credit to the Orioles, who have not operated like this. They went out to the market and said, we're going to be the big dogs here and we're going to make it happen. And once again, like, the Pete contract might not be great for them, but they're trying. They're trying. And there's a real world where Pete Alonso does hit 40 home runs for them. And it's exactly what they needed in the middle of their lineup, a really young team. So, Joe, I just feel like my honest opinion right now is I need a move to restore some of my faith. And then I need move number 2, 3, 4, and 5 for me to actually project this team going forward way ahead of where it was last year. And instead, all I've done is seen steps backwards.
This offseason has been a what's next offseason for the Mets, because they're losing all these pieces, and all you can respond with is, well, that's not a good start. Well, that's not a good decision, or that's not a good move. What's next? How are they going to fix this? And you mentioned about fans showing up, and all you have to do is just think about the attendance the last couple years. The Mets set the expectation by the way they acted prior to the 2024 season. So not this season, the season before, that it was a transition year. They weren't necessarily trying to go for it. So fans didn't show up, and fans weren't there even late in the season when things were going well, because they thought the air was going to come out of the balloon. They were kind of programmed that this wasn't a team really going for it. And then 2025, it's a different conversation. They sign Juan Soto. They bring Pete Alonso back because that's the way the market worked out. They bring Sean Manaea back, and everyone wanted that, and everyone loved that deal. They were aggressive, and Steve Cohen called out the fans to show up. The fans showed up, and the team let the fans down, and that's going to happen, right? It's baseball. The Mets blew the season. It's unfortunate. It's one of the worst things that we have seen as a fan, but that's just baseball. On the field, it didn't work out. It wasn't that the Mets weren't talented enough to succeed. It's that it just didn't happen. As you said, you now circle into this offseason. I don't think it necessarily meant, all right, we have to win them back by signing Kyle Tucker on November 15th because.
Right. But don't operate like that.
Yeah. But the reaction is rightfully fuming from Mets fans right now, because we're here on December 10th. The winter meetings have concluded, and the Mets are in no way, shape, or form better. Other than the only thing you could say is they're better defensively because Marcus Semion's on the team and Brandon Nimmo isn't and Alonso isn't. But now they need a first baseman. Now they need an outfielder, maybe two, but more likely one, and then at least for like a serious everyday player. This team is the way I'm thinking here, Connor, is we're going to see a bunch of trades, and you're going to see need for need trades. You mentioned Kodai Senga. That could be a possibility. David Peterson could be a possibility. Jeff McNeil could be a possibility. And then I think they're going to attempt to be opportunistic in the free agent market. And to your overall point, that doesn't sound exciting. If you're a Mets fan, especially the way that the team has operated since Steve Cohen purchased the franchise, having the offseason be about opportunistic free agency and robbing Peter to pay Paul in trades a little bit.
You're exactly right with that statement. Trades are great, but you lose assets when you make trades.
For sure. And look, maybe it's a situation where they don't want Kodai Senga around and there's a different starting pitcher they'll get to replace him and they'll feel better about the rotation there. But if this is a situation where David Stearns was on Mets Hot Stove, he was on MLB Network and talking about the pathway for young players. And look, if there's someone that wants to see the pathway for the young players, I'm pointing here. Me. I'm the guy that wants to see that. But he's talking about Carson Bench and Jet Williams and AJ Ewing and Ryan Clifford. He's naming all these guys by name in a public forum. Could it be some posturing? Sure. But it inherently has to make you wonder, are they going to just get a stopgap first baseman until Ryan Clifford is ready? Are they just going to get a stopgap center fielder until Carson Bench or AJ Ewing are ready? Marcus Semion's 35 years old. If he doesn't bounce back and he continues kind of the trajectory that he's on offensively, is he DFA'd at some point? And Jet Williams becomes a second baseman. Like, that's exciting in a way, but also frustrating because you're trying to chase the Phillies. You're trying to chase the Dodgers, and the Mets are not operating like a team that's actually trying to do that.
No, that's what the Guardians do. Leave that to the Guardians and the Rays and those kinds of teams. That's not what New York City baseball does. It's not. And 100%. If Steve Cohen thinks that's going to work and David Stearns thinks that's going to work, enjoy Citi Field being 20% full. And I won't even feel bad. I would actually say, you want to charge, $80 to park, and you went out and left three positions saying, maybe in 8 months our prospects are going to fill that spot. Joe, you and I love prospects as much as anybody. Just betting the house that Carson Bench, Jet Williams, Ryan Clifford are all going to be hits. That's not how this thing works, right? And I feel pretty good about Carson Bench. I feel pretty good about Jet Williams. But that's sports, man. Like, even the greatest prospects sometimes, if they don't fall on their face for good, they even go through hiccups. that you need guys there. And I don't view the Mets as this transition team. And the alarm to me would be, man, like, are we aligned here? We went out and got Juan Soto last year because I thought we were trying to win a championship. We have Francisco Lindor in his prime right now because I thought we're trying to win a championship. But then we're going to play actually, we need a year or two to kind of wait till these young guys are ready up here. Is David Stern's vision aligned with Steve Cohen's vision? The vision that Cohen puts in front of the fan base often? Because if that's a problem, that's the biggest issue with the organization. And I'm not accusing them of that being the problem, but the more this goes on, that's the alarm that rings to me of being the problem. And that's bigger organizational, I won't say dysfunction, but an unevenness on the timeline of everything. And that is something that is very hard to overcome. So I think we'll cut it there. I think we maybe save the legacy of Pete for a full pod because I don't know if I want to kind of blow through it. Everything, he's the all-time home run leader for this team. When Pete Alonso comes back to Citi Field as an Oriole, I'd be the first person, I think, along with everybody, standing up cheering. The dude played every single night. He played every single night. He did his best to improve at first base, hit a lot of home runs, gave us a lot of great moments. I think he honestly would have loved to be a Met for life, and that opportunity didn't come his way in terms of, like, anyone sitting out there would have taken 5 years, $155 million. Okay. So Pete Alonso deserves, all the love in the world from Mets fans. And I think he'll get it. I have no doubt about that. But maybe that's a longer conversation on our normal show too. And I also love getting the fan questions, or even just, I'll read some reactions off involved as well, Joe, but obviously the floor is yours for that as well.
Yeah, I agree, Connor. I think we save like the big Pete Alonso legacy, but look, this is a guy drafted, second round pick, developed, made his way through the system, kind of defied the odds of, at the time in baseball, where it was, service time. Everything was service time manipulation. He made the opening day roster, sets the rookie home run record, eventually sets the Mets home run record. His legacy with the Mets is incredibly strong, and there's a reason that there is such uproar today. And I think people are upset about Edwin Diaz, but I think people are hurt by Pete Alonso's department.
That's a good way of putting it, Joe.
And I think it's different. So I think people are really hurt right now. And, we've been mega critical here on this emergency episode. So if you were here looking for the
therapy,
hey, everything's gonna be okay, that this may not have been the episode for you. But at the end of the day, where we stand now, it's unfortunate that it got to this point, and Mets are now without those players. It's time David Stearns needs to saddle up, and he needs to show what this vision is, because the reality is it's not clear. We don't know what the vision necessarily is. We're guessing. So I want to be doing a show soon where I get it. Whether I agree or not can be a different conversation. I want to understand what's going on, because right now I don't.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style. 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac. The all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vista, Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. Of course, subscribe to our show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on YouTube. Like I said, I'll try to, along with the mailbag questions, read off if anyone wants to. You might have like a memory of a game with Pete Alonso, or how you're feeling about the state of the team right now. I'd actually like to kind of get a feel from the fan base that's not just angry tweets all the time that I see on Twitter, but maybe some actual messages from the Mets Pod. Joe and I aren't going anywhere. We don't shut it down for the offseason, and we really hope to have some good news to talk about on the Mets Pod soon. So we'll catch everyone next week.